Okay, so now we're going to look at like how are the individual workouts going to come together. So I think it's important to look at where the work wants to go. Like there's two ways you can kind of do this, right? You could select the rep ranges, and if you wanted to focus on a specific rep range, you could select these rep ranges and then pick these exercises. I have a bias towards picking the exercises first because I feel that if we want to target specific areas with specific outcomes, that there's rep ranges that best suit specific exercises, and it also caters to the skill and kind of where the client is at in terms of training age. So a lot of people go with the rep ranges first. I kind of go with the movements first and select appropriate rep ranges. They kind of still fall in alignment with what we've spoken about in the content. Just it's an easy way of me to getting from A to Z, and you guys can decide which way you want to go. So we've picked the muscle groups. We've got this order. So now we're going to select these movements. So for the glutes, for this specific workout, I'm going to focus more on like the shortened position of the muscle. So I'm going to pick a 45-degree extension, which overloads the shortened position of the muscle, but not too much. And what it allows us to do is get some movement in the hips, kind of prime those muscle groups, still train hard enough, but kind of prepare us for the main event, which is the barbell hip thrust. Bigger range of motion, bigger exercise, more muscle involved, more skill involved. So if we do a movement first, which is kind of less complex but still in the target tissue, just primes us for this particular movement when we're doing a high frequency method. If we weren't doing a lot of glute work in the session, I might pick this movement first, and then as fatigue drops in, we might put this movement second. It doesn't really matter. You've just got to be able to rationalize it. But I just look at it and go, if I went in and did some 45-degree extensions first, then I did some hip thrusts, I'm probably going to hip thrust better. It's the bigger muscle group, the bigger movement, sorry. So I want to make sure I'm as prepared as possible for that. Then we moved on to that one chest exercise, bang for buck. It's going to be dumbbell because it's easy for variation. It's either going to be flat or incline depending on the client. I've picked a flat one. It's just like hit the mid portion of the pec, lots of range of motion, lots of variability in terms of wrist and elbow position and shoulder position. A lot of clients are going to be able to fit within that. So it's very easy to do. So it ticks all the boxes. Then we move on. So when it comes to development of a muscle, we need to think about the divisions of that muscle and where they attach and how do we stimulate them. For most development of shoulders, it's going to be the medial and posterior head, like I've discussed. So the lateral raise is going to be the best exercise to stimulate those heads. We're going to do a dumbbell variation, and then we're going to do a cable variation later. So the resistance profile is just a little bit different. It's like where it's more challenging and where it's not between the range of motion, where there's more force and less. So it's why we do a dumbbell and a cable variation, just so we're challenging that whole kind of strength, the whole contractile range of the muscle. Then we've picked a couple of exercises, so some tricep dips and some kickbacks for this particular exercise. It's elbow extender exercise, and then a shoulder extender exercise with a elbow extension movement as well. So it's just like taking into consideration like two key roles of that elbow or the tricep, and making sure that we're kind of training those to stimulate that tissue. Now we're moving on to the next part of the workout. So because we've got this back focus, and we know we're going to hit this again later in the week, we can separate this into kind of like divisions. So what I've done is like we're going to go lat divisions, and we're going to go shortened and kind of mid to lengthened range in these positions. And we're going to start with like kind of the similar approach to that first workout. It's like some straight arm rope cable pull downs, working some range of motion through the shoulder joint, getting that lat nice and short and getting some movement through the shoulder joint and stuff, priming it for, the big shabam, which is a neutral grip lat pull down. You can put a chin up here, depending on the skill level of the client. You can make a neutral grip. So neutral grips here. So we've got prone, supinated, and neutral. Neutral is a better position, in my opinion, especially at shoulder width, to stimulate lats and train them to their function, which is shoulder extension mainly. So in my opinion, this would be the best movement to do to make sure if we did these two exercises together, we would be able to stimulate those lats sufficiently for either maintenance, strength, or growth. Then we're moving on to the hamstrings. Hamstring has two functions: hip extension as well as knee flexion. If we want to train it in isolation, we do knee flexion. If we want to train it in conjunction with things like glutes, we would do some form of like hip extension exercise. So I've done a lying leg curl and a B stance RDL. So we're just going to put them together. And it's mainly because I feel that if we train a isolation exercise for an intermediate or a beginner client with too much density, it can start to affect their performance. So this is where I've just taken the profile of the client and gone, cool, well, I'm just going to do both functions of the muscle for this isolation exercise. So I'm going to go, leg curl and hip hinge. Then we go, right, well, there's a focus for the program to work on rear delts or the deltoids. We need to work on the posterior division of the shoulder as well. So a really good exercise for that is a rope face pull. So I've put that in there. And then I've gone with a barbell bicep curl. It's very easy to do, very easy to manipulate. We can change hands position by using easy bar, straight bar. Most people have access to it, and it kind of does work the muscle in its mid-range, which is kind of desirable for someone who's not really trying to focus too much on stimulating specific parts of that muscle group. So we just work it with where it's strong, where it's safe, and we can pick other times to do specific movements for that muscle group. Now we're moving on again. So we've had a little bit of time off. We've had a break, and now we're going to move into the next exercise. So we've got some glutes again. So just put in a front foot elevated step back lunge, just with like a forward torso lean, a long stride, and a slower eccentric. So it's just like lengthening that glute. So it's training that mid-range of the glute. It's not really overloading the shortened position because when we stand up, there's no force going horizontally. But it's okay because we've already done that at the start of the workout. We've already done that, in this workout one. So now we're trying to work on like, how can we stretch the muscle? Now, the B stance RDL would have worked the hamstring and the glute. So it's kind of cool that we can pick movements that will kind of primarily and secondarily activate muscles. It's very similar in this instance as well. We'll get a little bit of glutes. We'll get some glutes. We'll get a little bit of quads, which is still desirable because we need to target that tissue. But we don't want to overstimulate the quads because that's not the look we're looking for. Then we move on and we go to a Bulgarian split squat with the back foot elevated with no front foot elevation. So if we do that movement, we typically are leant forward and we typically are still stretching that that glute out and working that mid-range of that muscle again. We don't really have to change the way we do that movement unless someone wanted a little bit more quad bias. They could elevate that front foot and there'll be more movement through the knee joint. The torso will be more horizontal, then leant forward, alters the mechanics. There's less involvement of the hip. We stimulate the quads a little bit more. So it just depends on what you want to do. So if I did have I do have quads in here. If I did want to stimulate that, it would be Bulgarian split squat with front foot elevation. I would put that in there, and then I know that that's going to stimulate the quads a little bit more. Still works the glutes, just not as much, and it stimulates the quads a lot. Then we got to go back to the shoulders, that middle division again. This is where we spoke about it before. If the client's like, not as developed in the front of the shoulder, you could pick an anterior shoulder movement. You could swap one of these tricep exercises out. Let's do that. So we're going to go with a seated dumbbell shoulder press. Hang on. So seated dumbbell shoulder press. Okay, so that is going to stimulate the divisions of the front delts. So we've got side delt primarily. We're going to do that at the start because we want to make sure that capped look is the primary goal of the workout. So that's going to be first. Then we're going to do a dumbbell shoulder press. And then we're going to move over to just some more like extension-based work, kind of stimulating the longer or the lengthened position of the tricep, where when we look at the other exercises that we did in day one, we're really emphasizing the shortened position of the tricep. So again, it's just like making sure we're working those muscles across their whole contractile range again. So that's workout 3. Now we go back to day 4. Now we go to day 4. And we look at the exercises again. And we go, sweet, what are we going to do for these? Now, because we've kind of picked lat divisions for the muscles in here for this back day, we're going to go with the more upper back kind of rowing, kind of rhomboids, teres major, those kind of, traps, and pick movements that are going to stimulate that tissue. So we're going to do a prone grip, lat pull down, leaning back, which is going to stimulate those fibers because the line of force suggests that it's going to work, that tissue. And then we're also going to do either a seated row with a straight bar or a single dumbbell row or something along those lines where we're pulling straight at the torso. And we can sufficiently tick the boxes saying, yep, cool, we've fulfilled the, work done in that area through those particular exercises. Then we go to the hamstrings. So we have to work the hamstrings. Now, again, we need hip extension and knee flexion. So just alter the movements a little bit. We're going to do a Romanian deadlift. And because that is a more complicated exercise, we're going to do that first in the hamstrings. Then we're going to do a seated leg curl, which is solely isolating the hamstring and actually, focusing on shortening it with, not a lot of fatigue, but a large amount of stimulus. So my favorite hamstring exercise, if anyone were to ask. Then we're changing the setting of the rope face pull to go, from vertically downward. Just working again like divisions of the back and the posterior deltoid. You could put a rear delt fly in here. So if someone wanted to work, the rear delt fly across its in its isolation, we could do a rear delt machine fly. No problems. Stimulating that tissue, easy done. Changing the bicep exercise to adhering to its function, which is flexion and supination. So that twisting curl takes care of the supination part. The non-twisting on the other bicep exercises takes care of the other function. So really kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's with the movements that we're not sending lots of volume to, but just making sure that we, try and get as much work in that muscle across its length as we can with the minimum amounts of work, exercises that we're selecting for it.